from the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
I wanted to make sure that whoever I picked was as honest as the day is long, that he understood how the legislative system works, because whoever's lieutenant governor is the person who oversees what goes on every day in the legislature, and smart. And he's just a kind person, which I love. Like, there's no drama. It's just two folks getting along, getting stuff done. We both have a long-term vision for Nebraska, and I can't wait to get to work with him.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to the 26th season and this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, getting to know Al Davis, a former state senator and Democratic candidate for lieutenant governor. He is here to share his story on and off the campaign trail. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate the opportunity to come and visit with your listeners and watchers today.
You bet. Now, for those viewers who don't know Al Davis, which is hard to imagine, how would you introduce yourself?
That's a very tough question. I'm not sure how anybody ever works through that explanation. And I have to first of all say thanks so much to Carol for all her good words about me. I hope that I can live up to those. But you know, I've always tried to be a fair and honest person. I grew up in the Sandhills in a wonderful ranch family, and just feel I owe a lot to my community and a lot to the state where I grew up.
Okay, you referenced Hyannis. We're going to put a map up for our viewers so they can see exactly where that is. What was that like to grow up there?
So my circumstances are very unusual in a lot of ways. So I'm an only child, raised on a ranch with a grandmother next door and a great aunt who were just doting grandparents. My parents were older, so it was a little bit different than a lot of people's upbringing. But you know, it's really the great thing about these small towns is it really doesn't matter where you are economically as much as you might think, because everybody's mixing together all the time, so you don't have the stratification. And you know what I say about my community is it was just a wonderful place to grow up in so many ways. And many opportunities that, you know, there are many things that small towns miss, but there are also many opportunities that people in town don't get to take advantage of. So I have nothing but fond memories from living there.
Okay, before we talk about your qualifications as a lieutenant governor, talk to us about what that office actually entails.
So the office of lieutenant governor, there are, I think, 6 statutory requirements. First of all, you oversee the work that the legislature does. So that means you sit in the president's chair, and if there are rulings, you call on those. If you're not being assigned to do something else by the governor, then you in the event that there's a vacancy in office, you know, obviously the lieutenant governor steps in and takes that over. When the governor's out of the state, the lieutenant governor is the acting governor during that time. The lieutenant governor is often assigned duties by the governor to take control of, and boards and commissions that the governor might sit on. You know, oftentimes the lieutenant governor takes those positions. And one of the requirements is, you know, it's a full-time job, so you need to be there all the time. So I think, you know, Senator Blood and I visited a lot about a few things. I didn't talk much about my background, and I will do that if we have time to do that, Kathy. But one of the things that was near and dear to my heart when I was in the legislature was making sure that our fire and EMS services were adequately taken care of, and we did a lot of work to try to smooth some of the regulations and things that were in place at the time. So I've asked Senator Blood if she's elected and we take over the governor's mansion this fall, if that would be an area that I could work within, and she said yes. So, you know, I'm excited about that. I still think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Whether you know it or not, EMS is just it's all volunteers. There's a tremendous workload in trying to get prepared for that. Thank God for those volunteers that are out there. They do yeoman's work, and they do a lot of volunteer work. Most of the communities I know, they raise the money to buy the ambulance, And then you got your fire crews, and don't we all know that we need fire protection, and especially in rural parts of the state where, you know, there's a lot of risk of fire. We've had some major fires this summer, so those guys are extremely valuable, and women. They're men and women now that are doing that job. So that's one of the things that I really hope to work on.
And I want to talk about that a little bit more. I do think it important to bring up your background at this point, because when someone, especially our viewers watching, saying, Lieutenant Governor, why is he going for that? Bring us up to speed here in terms of your background.
Well, as I said, I graduated from high school in Hyannis, went on to college, came back, and I've done a number of different things in my community. You know, I was the chamber president at one time, and was one of the charter members of the tourism committee that was developed there. Had a guest ranch of our own at one time, so that sort of seemed like a natural progression. And served on the fire board there, was an EMT for a while, and then was also, you know, I took some training with the fire department, although I never did really, wasn't able to do that work. But and then was on the school board for a number of years. When we had a Class 1 school, and you may not be familiar with those, but those were the old elementary school systems that were only K-8 schools or K-6. So if you lived in the country and you, your time would come where it was time for you to serve on the school board. The other folks have had enough. So I got on that, and I really kind of enjoyed the work and seeing that, you know, our students were progressing. So then I ran for the school board, the high school board at the time, which ultimately became a K-12 system, and when some legislation passed to change that. And that's when I decided I wanted to run for the legislature in 2012. I realized that so much of rural Nebraska was dealing with the crisis of the property taxes and a loss of, you know, there wasn't much state aid that came out to those school districts because of the equalization formula, the TIOSA formula. So, you know, basically these schools have to fund the entire cost of the education on their own dime. And it gets very costly and very expensive. So if you hear about the complaints about property taxes, it's usually the school system that's the cause. And the reason that is the cause is the state has always been reluctant to fully fund the schools, although it is the paramount duty of the state in the Constitution.
Talk to me a little bit. So 2013 to 2017 is the time frame that you served.
Right.
Walking away from that role, Al, what did you believe to be your greatest victories in representing the state?
So I served on the Education Committee for 2 years, the Revenue Committee for 2 years. You know, my entire focus at the time was to try to deal with this funding problem, and it hasn't been solved yet. So after I was out of the legislature, I still served with some committees to try to work on that, and we can talk about how that works, but it was very frustrating. But you know, the things that I'm most proud of, I guess, are the things I did with regard to EMS work and fire. You know, we were able to secure a tax credit for the work that they do in a community. We passed a bill called the Great Plains Compact, which allowed South Dakota firefighters to come into Nebraska and Nebraska firefighters to go into South Dakota to do some work. Now, you can't imagine that wasn't already in place, but because of insurance rules and regulations, if there was a fire in South Dakota, we couldn't go there until it crossed the state line. And then we could go to the state line, and we had to quit until there was a approval. And then, you know, we passed a LV, I can't remember the name anymore, but it was a bill to bring a seaplane in to rural parts of the state. Those are air tankers that contain water and fire suppression. So those are the things that I think I'm most proud of.
Okay.
Although I did a number of other things. I served on the Aging Nebraska Task Force, was responsible for the Alzheimer's state plan that was put through at that time, and unfortunately the state didn't do much about that, and so here we are all these years later with nursing homes closing down and a shortage of facilities for people who do have Alzheimer's to go to. And it's not going to get any better, I have to tell you, and without some serious discussion.
So I'm listening to you and thinking about all the good that you and those serving alongside you did. also sense a little frustration. You walk away in 17, and then lo and behold, earlier this year, you get a call from Senator Carol Blood saying, Al, I'd really like it if you would consider. So talk to us a little bit about that invitation for you to return to public office and how you know Carol.
So I think that's the first part of the story that we need to talk about. I know you've talked to people that are engaged with the Meade ethanol plant, the outlaw ethanol plant. I don't want to qualify it as an ethanol plant because it was an outlaw ethanol plant. But I've been working as the lobbyist for the Sierra Club the last couple of years, and obviously that was when that issue came up to the top of the heap with the Guardian newspaper in January of 2020. That became the premier issue that was the Sierra Club's focus because of the risk to human health there and the plants and animals that live around there. Do you want me to give you a little synopsis of what took place there so your viewers know what that's
briefly,
all about?
Yes.
So a normal ethanol plant will use corn to make ethanol out of that, and there's a byproduct that is called wet distiller's grain or wet cake, and that's a very nutritious product that's often fed to livestock. So that's why ethanol works so well in Nebraska, because we can make the ethanol that can be sold, and you've got the nutritious product that can be fed to livestock. So the ethanol plant at Meade took a shortcut. So seed companies are required, seed is like any other product. It has an expiration date on it, and so the seed companies never know how much to make, so they'll make too much, but then they need to dispose of it. Well, it's treated with pesticides. These seed corns are, and that's to prevent insects from attacking them when they're in the very young stage. So the plant at Meade decided that what they were going to do was process all these spent pesticide-treated seeds. The problem with that is that cannot be fed to livestock. So the plant applied for the plant wrote a letter to NDEE in 2012 saying they were going to do this, and NDEE, at the time NDEQ, said, well, we're not going to require another public hearing. So they began manufacturing that in 2016. People in Meade started complaining right away about the toxic odor and the sicknesses that were going on, dead animals, sick animals. So now to get to the point with Senator Blood, so when the Sierra Club took this up, and I started looking at what was going on there, I said, this is an issue that really has to be addressed by the legislature, because in my opinion, it's a failure of the executive branch to do the job that they should have done. But the scope was huge. And so you've got health and human services that are engaged because of human health, and you've got natural resources because of the water table that's been contaminated, and you've got agriculture because of the livestock that are engaged there. Judiciary, because in my opinion, if the packaging says you can't feed this to livestock, why were they allowed to do this? So on and on. I said we need a special committee of the legislature that can look into this. And I took that to the senator who represents Meade, thinking that he was the natural choice for that. He didn't want to do it. A couple of other ones I asked were not interested in doing it. Finally, I thought, I know Carol and she's a good person. I'm going to go talk to her.
Okay.
So I asked her if she would consider taking this on, and she thought about it for a day, and she said she would do it as a favor to me, basically. Well, it became way more than that to her, because she realized that this was a huge problem for the state. So, she went way beyond where she had to, and she put together a town hall in Meade with the people, who the people could talk to, who hadn't learned anything. They didn't know what was going on. She had a Facebook page that she put up, and she had a meeting with Green Bellevue. So she really worked that, and I just realized, I said, this woman is the real deal. She really cares about Nebraska, just as I do. So I didn't think that I would ever have this opportunity again, but when she called me and asked me if I would be willing to join her on the team, I was just thrilled to do so, because I have so much respect for her as a person.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for that background too. Very, very helpful. As long as we're on the subject, I do want to put a couple photos up for our viewers. Some other gentlemen, you might recognize these guys. If you would tell us a little bit about them and your interactions up to this point in the campaign.
Well, Mr. Kelly, as you probably know, is the running mate for Tim Pellin, who's running for governor. he worked at the worked for the Attorney General's office for some time and was the U.S. Attorney. I don't know him personally. I may have met him once, maybe when I was in the legislature, and that's basically all I can tell you about him. Mr. Blumenthal, I think works in IT. He's running with, as you can see, he has a beard, and you know that his running mate has a beard also. So I say those are the bearded guys. I wish they were here today so we could have a sharing of opinions.
Well, and we did invite Joe Kelly, just as we invited Jim Pillen when Senator Blood was on, and just did not receive any response back from them. So we'll move forward with you. In this interview, we're going to put up another graphic for our viewers. Key issues of yours and Senator Blood's. You've referenced a few of them, but let's put them up for our viewers and just briefly walk us through those.
We'll start with prosperity for all Nebraskans. There are several things that are engaged in that, and just for the sake of brevity, I'll try to give you the 30,000 foot level. But the 2008 crash really made a big change in young people who were just getting engaged in the workforce. So we went through an extended period of time where there were no jobs or very few jobs, and they were low-paid jobs. And so the young people who have a lot of debt, not college debt necessarily, but rent and car payments and all these other things, child care, et cetera, have not been able to build a resource base. And in the United States, we have seen this tendency that the wealthy seem to be getting wealthier, and then the middle class and the lower class are just sort of stable. And so, Carol thinks we need to find solutions. Housing is a problem. We've got a housing issue in Nebraska. One of the things that I think she is a big proponent of is pre-K education and child care, and some help with that, because that is a cost that has gotten exorbitant for most young parents. We're to the point now where parents have to decide whether it makes any sense to have a second income, because the costs that go along with that if you've got children are so high. So I think that's the primary objective that she's got there, and we need to build a base for people to be successful in Nebraska, and that's built on prosperity for everybody, not just a few.
Okay, thank you. We'll put it back up here for you, Al, so take a look. Next.
Well, infrastructure in everyone's mind is roads and bridges. That's certainly very important. When I was in the legislature, we passed a bill because we had so many county bridges that were in terrible shape, and the gas tax was put in place, and the next year we were able to do some work with those bridges. So we've got to keep our infrastructure up. It's especially important in farm country, where you've got to get crops to field in a timely manner or out in a timely manner, and if your bridges are out and you've got to go 10 miles around, it'll take you another hour every trip. So that's a big deal to agricultural people, and should be. Infrastructure also is prisons and all the buildings that the state owns, and we can talk a little bit about that. If you remember a few years ago, the facility at Geneva was basically abandoned because it had been allowed to deteriorate so badly. When I was in the legislature, I had a couple of state parks, and people called me, and I went up to the state parks, and I said, well, these things are in terrible condition. What's going on? Well, resources. Unfortunately, government has costs too, and we have to be able to meet those costs. And if we have infrastructure, we have to keep it up. Now, there are other things that are important in infrastructure, one being broadband development. This is another thing that's extremely important to agricultural people. As we move into a more and more technological ag sector, the access to broadband is essential for running the pivots, for a lot of new developments with some, pivots today through the technology that's available have the ability basically to fertilize one area of a field, not the rest, to water a little heavily in one area, not the rest. But you got to be able to send the message to it. So that's important. The other piece of that is being smart about infrastructure, and this is the prison issue that I think Carol's talked about many times. Nebraska has built a number of prisons in the last few years. We are still 160% of capacity in terms of overcrowding. That's extremely dangerous. It was dangerous years ago. We had Tecumseh, the riots at Tecumseh. We had, at the state pen in Lincoln this year, the plumbing system was backed up, so toilets were not flushable for a while. You got a bunch of people that are frustrated and bored anyway, and you end up in sort of inhumane conditions. What are you going to have? A boiling kettle. So we've got to do more with the infrastructure we've got in the prisons, but that's also being smart about prisons. And just incarcerating people without solving the problems doesn't work, because those people are probably going to cycle back in pretty soon. So we can build another prison, then we're going to build another prison, then we're going to build another prison and another prison. And if it's $200 million to build a prison, then it's another $200 million to operate it, or $40,000, $50,000 a year. So how do you solve that? You need more drug courts, you need more veterans courts, you need counseling in the prison system itself. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with how that works, Kathy, but if you're going to be paroled, a condition of parole might be that you have to take anger management classes or get your GED. Well, if those classes aren't offered in prison, they're never going to get those classes. So they just spend more time there, and they learn to be a better criminal. Is that logical? We have better ways to do it. Ankle bracelets. Let's adapt the new technologies and be smart about prisons. And let me say this, one more thing about that. Kansas and Texas both followed some of the models that Steve Lathrop tried to introduce this year in the legislature to address some of these issues. And those states, I think, have closed 2 prisons. So it does work.
Okay. Al, I want to go back to your list here just briefly, because we have about 5 minutes left in the interview. Let's go back to the list. You also have public safety, public health, and education. One of the things I really want to make sure that I am bringing out in this particular interview is that importance of representing an entire state and knowing both sides of the state. Talk a little bit about, you're from Hyannis. You also reside in Lincoln. You've really been on both sides of the fence here. Talk about that knowledge and experience and the importance of something like that when it comes to anybody who would be serving on behalf of the entire state.
Well, I think if you come from a lot of people in the western part of the state feel disconnected from Lincoln and Omaha, and one of the reasons is, even the television, the news largely comes from Denver. So, that's a bridge that needs to be mended. There's some misconceptions about eastern Nebraskans and urban people. I mean, and that I always say about Lincoln is a community of children of farmers. So those people in Lincoln largely know all about rural Nebraska. The frustration that a lot of rural Nebraskans have is they don't feel like they're being listened to. I'll just take property taxes as an example. You've probably heard about the pink cards that have been mailed out. And so a friend of mine in Chadron told me, he said the people there are just up in arms about taxes, the property taxes going up. And he said ultimately at the meeting last night, after everything settled out, they said, well, it's all about what's going on in Lincoln and the fact that they won't do anything there. So, urban senators need to make trips to rural Nebraska and listen to those people and really absorb what they have to say. And rural people need to do the same thing and understand the problems of urban Nebraska, because there are some.
So we have just a couple minutes left. I really want to talk about this last month before the campaign. What is the strategy here in terms of yours and Senator Blood's approach in just these final weeks?
So our campaign is being run, with not a lot of resources. And, resources are the blood of a campaign. So we have to do things differently than other folks would do them. So, I'm doing a lot of outreach, so is Carol. I'm going out to Chadron this weekend for a parade. I'm going to be, in another couple parades here coming up. Carol's going to Grand Island, and she's got several, she's going to be in Tecumseh. So we've got town hall meetings, and, we've got a team on the ground that's making calls and things. We're going to work as hard as we can until the election, and every dollar that we invest in our campaign will be used frugally.
Okay, thank you. Final thoughts, talking with Al Davis today about his run in the governor's race with Carol Blood going for lieutenant governor. Final thoughts for our viewers?
Well, let me say this. 25 years of the same party running the governor's mansion. 50 to 75 to 100 years of the same party running the legislature. Rural Nebraskans feel left out. Depopulation's taking place in rural Nebraska. It's time for a change. And the people that can make that change are the voters. Get to the polls and make a change for Nebraska and open a new door for us.
Thank you, Al Davis. For folks wanting more information, we're going to put a website up as well as offer a phone number. So you can go to electcarolblood.com or you can call Al directly. He's given us his cell phone. It's 308-458-9948. Al, thank you so much for being here today, sharing your time and expertise, and I want to wish you the best.
Thank you. I'm sorry it went so quickly.
Oh, it did, didn't it? Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thanks to
very
our
much.
students who are working so hard behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
And of course,
Thank
all
you.
of our viewers for watching. As we close, a look at UNO's campus as seen through the lens of Wyatt Moravets, a junior here at UNO. We will see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at nebraskapublicmedia.org/considerthis. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call UNO Television at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.